The guy impressed me.
Absolutely, right?
And then afterwards, no, he didn't fade. I mean, he went, it was kind of perfect coming from the University of Illinois that he was drafted by the Chicago Bears. And he didn't,
was still paid to the
right,
Vikings.
that's right. And in fact, I don't even know the Vikings were in existence then when he first got on. I can't remember when the Vikings were founded. Yeah, they were. They were, because they went to the, yeah, yeah. So anyway, it was just kind of nice. His whole career was there, and he didn't like, go to the Jets or something afterwards. Okay. All right. Dave, are we ready on Zoom? Okay. Good evening, everyone. All right. Back in the saddle, so to speak. Here we are again. And so we left off, we're talking in the section on Kalu Rinpoche's profound Buddhism about the mind. And last time he was talking about the nature of the mind, the qualities, so to speak, of the mind. And one of the strengths of Buddhism is the precision of its language, even though its teachings are truly beyond expression. Nonetheless, it has such sort of rigor, you might say, in having all these different terms that are really talking about the same thing, but coming at it from all these different angles. So they're like synonyms, but at the same time, each one has its own richness. Rinpoche talks about it's like a jewel with many different facets. It's ridiculous to say this facet is right and this one is wrong. They're just different kind of angles at which you're viewing something that doesn't have any shape. So hence we have Dharmakaya, but then they talk about emptiness. We have Sambhogakaya, but then they talk about bliss. We have Nirmanakaya, but then they talk about compassion. So it's very helpful for us, because what happens is, again, from my very limited experience, it's like you're steeping in something. And of course, that's really wonderful, because it's kind of oozing in through your pores, even though you're not doing anything consciously about that. It's said, for instance, of one great master in China. He had an attendant, a boy from the time he was 13, just taking care of the master's needs like a servant, but he was an ordained monk. And it said when the master died, the monks, the congregation, the lay people, the lay women, they realized that the boy had attained to realization, although he had never been seen to practice because he was always too busy taking care of the master. And so what they said is that it's like two ways of getting wet. You can jump into the lake, or you can just be walking through the mist continuously for a long time. Eventually you get saturated. The tremendous power, benefit, opportunity of the Dharma is really something beyond words. To give you an idea, we live in such a materialistic time, partly because of the power of science, and secondly, because of the degeneration and the death of the spiritual traditions. So let's say if you wanted to understand something, Buddhism is all about simply understanding the nature of things as they are. And in understanding the nature, you understand the appearances. Whereas it doesn't necessarily work the other way. You can understand all the appearances, but you never go below the surface, so to speak, and understand the nature. Now, if you have the right motivation, if you have this right kind of understanding too, then you can be learning all sorts of appearances, all sorts of knowledge, and it can lead you deeper. But it's removing those obstacles, the biggest obstacle, which is like our own arrogance, or that we don't even see the need to be looking deeper. We don't believe there is such a thing as deeper, so to speak. So for an example, let's take music. How does the modern world explain music? You can look up all sorts of books and stuff, and what do you see? You see like I don't know, an instrument, let's say like a xylophone. And then you've got something that strikes the instrument, like a little hammer. And of course, there are sound waves. They can get details about it, the nature of the waves, how their longitude, so to speak, and their latitude, their height. I don't know what the technical terms are. And then you have a medium through which the waves go, like the air or water has to be something there through that the waves can sound. And you can have all this discussion. But of course, what they're never talking about, the most necessary thing, is consciousness. Without the consciousness, there isn't any sound. But we don't look at that. We're always just looking at the mechanics of the thing. Now, this is the greatness of the Dharma. Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya. Why? Because the Nirmanakaya teachings, these flesh and blood teachings, are said to be the deceptive teachings. And why deceptive? Because they're spoken in a dualistic kind of way. Loving someone. It means it's kind of spoken from the standpoint of being apart from that person, which fundamentally is false, but nonetheless, that's how it appears to us. So it's speaking to the world of appearances. And this is really something because it allows us to use form, but this very gross level of form that we're all experiencing. So consequently, all of these teachings on loving kindness and compassion, on the afflictions, all the conceptual teachings, all the different pointers, you might say, they're all using this very gross level of material existence. We're so dominated by form. And yet in the midst of that, here are these virtuous teachings. Now it takes the faith that virtue is better than non-virtue. The faith in cause and effect to whatever degree we have it. But still, we're able to use the mind aspect, the consciousness aspect of this gross material existence where we can't walk through walls, where there's birth and death, all of these limitations that we have, all this dualistic appearance to us. Suddenly there's a path. Now, take a step up to the Sambhogakaya. See how remarkable this is, because now we're using form, but we know from the get-go that it's mentally created form, so it's more subtle. And therefore, although it's more flighty, because it can just go anywhere all the time, and our minds are so distracted that it's very challenging. At the same time, it's more powerful because you can use that subtle mind. The other thing is that we're still working with form, so it gives us something kind of sort of hold onto, so to speak. And yet something that we're not attached to, just these mental things. So immediately we're kind of freed up. And this is, of course, the great power of the Tantra. It's exceedingly skillful. And also, it gives you a way to have confidence that you're on the path. I mean, in other words, if you're practicing in the Nirmanakaya, all the sutric teachings, all the ordinary conceptual teachings, you can fool yourself. You can think, oh yes, I'm on the path, and actually you are. You're not fooling yourself in that way, but you can fool yourself as the progress on the path, or one thing or another. The mind is very easily fooled, so to speak, on that level, because we have been, for beginninglessness, creating, projecting this solid type existence, looking for something solid to be able to cling on to, thinking that that's going to be our safety, our anchor, or whatever. That's wrong from the beginninglessness, but nonetheless we do that. So we're so trained in that way that it's very easy, even though you're on the path, to kind of fool yourself about practice. And then you can sort of relax because you think, well, I'm sort of at a calm level. For instance, in your mind, you can have a very calm kind of mind, but it's not necessarily aware. It can be a dull kind of calmness. But you can fool yourself into thinking that this is some sort of equanimity or something, but it's just kind of like a false appearance of it. I think the technical term they use is that it's like a river in a grassland that can go underneath the grass and you don't see it. Your mind's actually submerged. You're still with the appearances of the grass on the surface, although it feels like it's stable. Now, compared to that, in the Sambhogakaya, when we're dealing with these forms, it can be extremely helpful because you can have an experience that is sort of supra-sensual, you might say, not a creation of your mind, something that immediately realizes, manifests. It can be just a tip of the taste, the tip of the tongue taste, but yet it's real. And a teacher can validate that. And then at least you have a feeling of this progress of the Vajrayana. And so you know you're on the path, and it gives you a certain kind of confidence because you're no longer getting your pride mixed in with it. There it is. It's because we're working with the mind itself, with all these helps, all the offerings, all the visualizations, everything, but the mind itself, but in this subtle form that we know is mind from the get-go, which is already kind of a blessing. But then in the Dharmakaya, to practice on the pure nature of the mind itself purely. It's very easy to deceive ourselves. It really is, because this is like the highest realization. So consequently, this is why I believe the Tibetans have taught for a long time that the Tantra is the specific, the most efficacious practice for a time of degeneracy. And they considered Guru Rinpoche's time to already be in a time of degeneracy. So how much more so ourselves? So we're exceptionally fortunate because we have, and again, speaking for myself, through no insight, through no having figured it out, through no knowledge of the path, simply stumbled into this. But truly, we haven't stumbled, because it said when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And this is an unconscious process. I mean, it's both conscious and unconscious. We really don't see the fullness of cause and effect. And you do something like, make seeming like just a simple water offering to a Buddha, but somehow, your mind was perfectly engaged at that moment. Those are the things that have very powerful effects, although it might not happen for 20 years. Who knows? But once we're on the path, we're not so worried about, the result. I mean, we're giving without expectation of return. It just becomes this huge flow. And even though we fall again and again, and our awareness is such that we see our limitations and imperfections, you might say, at the same time, there is this tremendous confidence that you're on the path. And so what's the worst that can happen? Suddenly you can't fall out of the universe anymore. The worst thing in the world can happen, and yet you're still there. So this evening, he's continuing with his teachings on mind. He had been discussing at some length last time, again, Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya, and relating it to, as far as the Dharmakaya, the great openness is basically the space. So the image he uses is like the space in this room. You can't grab onto it. If the room suddenly shrank down to the size of a molecule, the space would still be there. So you have the space, but then you have light penetrating the space. Light is the potential for knowingness. Because there's light, things can be seen. And then finally, the Nirmanakaya, this is the knowing aspect. In other words, you can see this is a book, this is a microphone, this is a sink, this is a plant. The ability to discriminate is our true nature. It's not some sort of mistake on our true nature or some sort of delusion. It's only our attachment to appearances that's the delusion. So he was talking about mind like that, and we left off at the four veils. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're on page 149. Okay. Although we possess Tathagata Garbha, Garbha is womb. Tathagata is what the appellation that was given to the Buddha. It means the thus come one. Gata is to go or to come. So there are different interpretations of that from some scholars, but basically, ta is like this, just as it is. Dharmata, just as it is, the truth as it is. So Tathagata Garbha is the womb of the Buddhas. Although we possess Tathagata Garbha, Buddha nature, and are Buddha by nature, how is it that we do not experience the qualities of this nature, but are afflicted by all the limitations of an ordinary being? This is because of the veils. When did these veils appear? They really have no origin. They have covered the mind since it has existed. In other words, since always. So the veil of ignorance. The fundamental mind is also called the potential of going into felicity. So the footnote says on felicity, in Sanskrit, Sugata Garbha, so the womb of bliss. Expression synonymous of Tathagata Garbha, potential of awakening. It comes from one of the designations of the Buddha, an awakened being, the one who has gone into felicity, Sugata. Su is bliss, Gata is go. So, for instance, Buddha Amitabha's Pure Land, Dewa Chen in Tibetan, is Sukhavati, yeah, Su, again being bliss, the land of bliss. Okay, the fundamental mind is also called the potential of going into felicity. It belongs to all beings. Not recognizing it is ignorance and is the main veil covering the mind. Our eyes allow us to clearly see all external objects. Nevertheless, they cannot see our own face or see themselves. In the same way, the mind does not see itself and does not recognize itself for what it is. This is called the veil of ignorance. You might think of it as this ignorance is this, it's like a given habit. From the mind is always kind of like looking out. It has the power to look in, but not through its ordinary methods. So practice is basically removing veils, and then the nature of the mind reveals itself, not really by looking at it. Looking at it as part of the distraction, part of the obscuration. Hard to believe, nonetheless. So that's the veil of ignorance. The mind does not see itself and does not recognize itself for what it is. This is called the veil of ignorance. So next is the veil of latent conditioning. The first consequence of ignorance is duality, where there is only emptiness. The mind falsely conceives, where there is in truth only emptiness, the mind falsely conceives a me as being the center of all experience. Where there is only clarity, it conceives perceived objects as others. This phenomenon is easily understood by referring to a dream. Not seeing the true nature of a dream world, we divide it into two parts. There are a subject that we identify as ourselves, and objects making up an external universe. In fact, both are no other than mind. All our experience functions in this same mode. Dividing the unique mind into two parts, we live in the universe of duality of subject-object. This is the second veil, called the veil of latent conditioning. Then moving on to the veil of conflicting emotions. From the notion of me springs hope of obtaining what is pleasant and what makes me feel comfortable in existence, as well as the fear of not obtaining what we desire and fear of living in threatening situations. Hope and fear are grafted onto the side of me. The other side of duality, the notion of other, includes all sense objects, forms, sounds, smells, tastes, contacts, or mental objects. Any object perceived as pleasant creates joy, and any object perceived as unpleasant is upsetting. Then these feelings are transformed into attachment and aversion. From the duality of me and other, hope and fear, as well as attachment and aversion, are produced. They come from nowhere other than emptiness of the mind and have therefore no material existence or an entity of their own. But not recognizing this any more than recognizing the real nature of phenomenon, we grant them an undue reality. This is called blindness or mental opacity. One finds a group of three basic conflicting emotions: attachment, aversion, and blindness, from which three other ones are produced. From attachment comes greed, from aversion comes jealousy, and from mental opacity comes pride. Now there's a footnote in here too. Actually, going back to the previous, the veil of latent conditioning, the dualism, says latent conditionings, I should have read this before, vasanas, in Tibetan, bakchak, are extremely numerous. Latent conditionings created by karma and forming the deepest layers of consciousness. They not only shape our mode of perception, interpretation, and reaction, but also the category of existence that we experience. This appears on different levels. On small habits, first of all, including our instincts, are part of this conditioning. Our dreams are its expression, as well as is the type of existence we have assumed, with its congenital tendencies that are its own. Nevertheless, the first of these conditionings, affecting the totality of ordinary beings, human beings and animals, is the propensity for us to interpret any experience in dualistic terms of subject and object. All right, so that's the duality. But then he goes from there to the third veil, which is the outermore veil of the kleshas. So again, three basic conflicting emotions: attachments, aversion, and blindness, from which three other ones proceed. From attachment comes greed, from aversion, jealousy, and from mental opacity, pride. So again, the farther you go out, sort of the more complex they get. Aversion, for instance, is very easy to understand, but jealousy is more complicated. This gives six main conflicting emotions. The three basic conflicting emotions can be subdivided in many ways. Attributed to attachment are 21,000 ramifications relating to the type of object to which it applies. Attachment to a person, a house, a vehicle, and so on. Same process is also detected in 21,000 variants of aversion and blindness, and 21,000 conflicting emotions composed of a blend of the three previous ones. This is the source for the traditional 84,000 conflicting emotions. Our mind is inhabited by a multitude of conflicting emotions constituting another veil. And we can see, of course, in our life how this works. Something happens, and the next level, he's talking about karma, triggers. And because of our habituated dualism and our specific quality of it, it triggers conflicting emotions. And we can't get through those conflicting emotions. They colonize the entire mind. This vast mind is suddenly reduced down to a moment of hatred, and it blinds us. We just don't see the whole picture. We don't see that other being in their purity, for sure. We don't even see them in their actual samsaric existence, with the other factors that have impinged on them, the way that we are similar to them. We don't see any of that. All we're aware of is this, this flash of affliction, the hatreds, which interestingly Shantideva calls poisons. These are our true enemies. That's right. 84,000 heaps of dharma are the antidotes to the 84,000 painful emotions. The veil of karma as the outermost veil. Under the influence of conflicting emotions, we accomplish all kinds of negative acts with body, speech, and mind, which form the veil of karma. Therefore, we have four veils that successively engender each other. The veil of ignorance, the mind not recognizing itself, engenders the veil of the latent conditioning of duality, splitting I from the other, which engenders the veil of conflicting emotions, the 84,000 perturbations resulting from duality, which generate the veil of karma, negative acts accomplished under the power of conflicting emotions. Okay. All right, next, purity and blossoming. The mind, covered by these veils, makes us ordinary beings. Buddhas and bodhisattvas of the past were also at one time ordinary beings. They followed spiritual masters from whom they received instructions on the nature of the mind. They meditated and achieved Mahamudra. Having rid themselves of the four veils, they became pure. All the inherent qualities of mind bloomed within them. In Tibetan, pure is sang, bloomed is gye. The compound of the two syllables gives the word the meaning of the Buddha, Sanjay, purity and blossoming. It is a way open to us. We receive instructions, meditate, and obtain the realization of Mahamudra, that is awakening, capital A. Following the footsteps of Milarepa, it is possible for us to cover the path in a single lifetime. Now, signs of emptiness. The person who has realized the true nature of the mind understands at the same time that all phenomena, things and beings, universes and all their inhabitants are none other than the production of the mind, empty in essence. A certain number of signs indicate emptiness of the mind and the absence of own entity of phenomenon, or own being of phenomenon, absolute being of objects, phenomena, appearances. But we pay no heed to them. At the time of conception, when the mind enters the womb of the mother, the parents cannot see it. No materially perceptible effect allows us to detect its arrival. At the moment of death, even if the dying person is surrounded by many people, no one sees the mind exiting the body. No one can say it has left through this way or it has left through that way. Perhaps you have studied several years and acquired a great deal of knowledge. Nevertheless, this knowledge is not in a closet, a house, or in your chest. It is nowhere, because it lacks an existence of its own. It is stored in emptiness. At night, while asleep, we dream in a whole world with landscapes, cities, humans, animals, and all sense objects appears to us, onto which we add an emotional response made up of desire, aversion, and so on. During the dream itself, we are convinced of the real existence of all dream phenomena. Nevertheless, once we are awake, the phenomena have disappeared. They exist nowhere outside of the dreamer's mind. It is the same process that unfolds during the bardo of becoming. Forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and so on are perceived as real. Appearances manifested during the life that has ended no longer have an existence. When the mind enters a womb, the appearances of the bardo vanish and no longer exist. Now, he's talking about three supports of existence. The waking state, the dream, and the bardo have no reality in themselves. They are only manifestations of the mind to which we wrongly attribute an entity of their own. These three states are described as three bodies. First, the body of karmic maturity designates the body and environment perceived during the waking state. Both are the result, after a long process of ripening, of karma accumulated in past lives. Then the body of latent conditioning refers to the body and the environment of the dream. The mental body is the body and experience of the bardo, governed by thinking alone. By the continual succession of these three bodies, all our experience unfolds in the cycle of existence, falsely taken as real. No, primordial awareness, individualized consciousness. The foundation of the mind is good in itself. It is the nature of awakening, similar to pure water. It has been said by the Buddha, all beings are Buddha, but their minds are obscured by adventitious impurities. When the impurities are dispersed, these beings are truly Buddhas. Not recognizing the awakened nature of the mind is ignorance. From ignorance arises all the conflicting emotions, desire, anger, jealousy, and so on, as well as the flow of dualistic thoughts. The Buddha nature of the mind is also called the potential of primordial awareness. Because of ignorance and dualistic grasping, the hindered functioning of the mind becomes a potential of individualized consciousness. All right, the footnote here, long footnote, this potential of individualized consciousness. Footnote says, the analysis of the Tibetan terms translated as potential of primordial awareness and potential of individualized consciousness will allow us perhaps to notice a few details. First, potential in Tibetan is kunchi, which literally means foundation of all, an expression chosen by Tibetan translators to render the Sanskrit alaya, meaning reservoir. So again, this alaya, Himalaya, him is snow. So the Himalaya is the abode of the snows, or she says a reservoir of the snows. Alaya consciousness, yes. So that's first, potential. Secondly, primordial awareness and individualized consciousness render, respectively, the term yeshe and namshe. So primordial wisdom is yeshe, individualized consciousness is namshe. Each of these words contains the syllable she, meaning to know, to be aware. From the point of view of its functioning, it refers to the nature of the mind, that for a Buddha and for an ordinary being is consciousness. The prefix yields the difference. Ye means primordial consciousness, while nam indicates the idea of separation and refers here to the duality of subject and object. The consciousness therefore has two modes of functioning. Pure functioning, free of any veil, is the primordial awareness. Impure functioning, hindered by a dualistic division, is the dichotomous, ordinary or individualized consciousness. On this point, Tibetan language is more explicit than Sanskrit, which was content to use jnana and vijnana. So you remember in the White Tara mantra, for instance, jnana is in there, and vijnana is the word they usually use for individual consciousness. Via is to divide, so that you're dividing consciousness. But nonetheless, the Sanskrit was content to use jnana and vijnana. That jna is knowing in Sanskrit, so that pops up in a lot of places. Prajna, paramita, and pra is beyond, or the perfection of knowing. Jnana, knowing, transcendent knowing. Anyway, the first term, jnana, simply means consciousness without any other precision. The second term, with the added prefix v, means, as in Tibetan, individualized consciousness. Using a prefix for the first term, Tibetan translators have avoided a false rendering of the sense and have emphasized the deep meaning of the word. To avoid all ambiguity, let us recall that the potential of individual consciousness is not collective unconsciousness, but the potential of each individual. It contains the karmic imprints accumulated by one individual, which will mature for this individual only. So that's rather in the weeds and rather a heavy kind of footnote, but I can encourage people to go back and read through that. But it is amazing to me. We were having this tonight, but when I was speaking of the precision of Buddhist language in the beginning, you're starting to get an idea. It's very helpful because as you try to approach these things in different ways and make these distinctions, what are they saying? You get a sense, at least, for what is not. All right. So when pure water is mixed with mud, it loses its quality of being pure water and becomes muddied water. In the same manner, because of impurities, the potential of primordial awareness becomes individualized consciousness. Think of that. We have pure water. Mud is mixed in there. It almost looks like a different thing. You know, you see this brown liquid instead of this transparent, clear liquid. Primordial awareness, individual consciousness. And we kind of make a god, a false god, a false refuge out of individualized consciousness. You know, people these days, you have people running around talking about my truth. The my is what makes it muddy. The my is what prohibits us from communicating with other people. Truly, in a very deep way. The my is what prohibits us from actually seeing into someone else's mind. We're just running around with this my all the time. And yet, from this heady footnote, you can see it's not abandoning that individual, so to speak, but rather purifying every element of it. And then you end up with, these great teachers. There you have a complete recognizable personality. They're not some sort of, washed out robot or something. I mean, but it's like the shortcomings become qualities and become delightful. It's just amazing. Our ordinary mind transformed into something that gives inspiration and hope to people just by having contact with an open mind. It's really beyond, it's beyond therapy. All right. Now, differentiated consciousness. So that was primordial awareness and individualized consciousness. Now, differentiated consciousness. This individualized consciousness as a mode of functioning is a unit designated by the term potential of individualized consciousness. From this unit, 7 differentiated individualized consciousnesses branch out. Just like the fingers are the differentiations of a unique hand. They are the visual consciousness that perceives forms, the auditory consciousness that perceives sounds, the olfactory consciousness that perceives smells, the gustatory consciousness that perceives tastes, the tactile consciousness that perceives contacts, the mental consciousness that identifies phenomenon by thinking, and disturbed consciousness that interprets perception in terms of desire, aversion, jealousy, and so on. So this is the famous in the Heart Sutra, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. Now, Kalu Rinpoche's tradition is, has a little slightly different flavor in some ways from, I don't know the 12 different Kagyu traditions at all, but I know it's different here. This 7th one, disturbed consciousness. Usually they're talking about 6 consciousnesses, individualized consciousness. But the Shakpa Kagyu here includes disturbed consciousness that interprets perception in terms of desire, aversion, jealousy, and so on. So that's interesting. You can see how that would work. But nonetheless, now, organs issued from the consciousnesses, from the ability of manifestation of the mind, appears the body. These are closely linked. The existence of the 8 consciousnesses in the mind produces in the body the existence of corresponding physical supports, the sense organs. Organs are similar to houses, inert in themselves, and the consciousnesses are like human beings who inhabit them. Therefore, we have eyes as support of visual consciousness, ears as support of auditory consciousness, nose as support of olfactory consciousness, tongue and palate as supports of gustatory consciousness, skin as support of tactile consciousness, mental organ as support of mental consciousnesses, although in this case, organ and consciousness are actually confounded. As for the potential of individualized consciousness and the disturbed consciousness, they have no corresponding organs of their own. One can say that individual consciousness is supported by the body in general, and disturbed consciousness by the totality of the sense organs. And finally, objects of senses. Finally, from an external point of view, consciousnesses are reflected in the sense objects. Forms are the object of visual consciousness. Sounds, the object of auditory consciousness. Smells, the object of olfactory consciousness. Tastes, the object of gustatory consciousness. Contacts, the object of tactile consciousness. Mental phenomenon, that's thoughts, are the object of mental consciousness. The totality of external phenomenon can be seen as objects of the potential of individualized consciousness. Phenomenon that are the objects of conflicting emotions can be seen as external reflections of the disturbed consciousnesses. When the mind is obscured by ignorance, its mode of functioning and relationship to the world is governed by a threefold process. Internally, by individualized consciousnesses. On the intermediate level, the sense organs, and externally, the sense objects. All right. Now, this detail of the senses, the objects, the consciousnesses, are gone over in great detail. These are teachings that usually, we don't hear. I mean, they're referred to when lamas come through town or give public teachings and that. But these are the kinds of things that Kempo would have studied, in his 12-year Kempo course. As far as we have, you can find these. They're in Kanzi's Buddhist teachings in India. I've forgotten the name of his book that I love. Buddhist Thought in India. Thank you. So they get into, and they have names for them. And I always move up like the ayatanas, and then there are other things, and it gets very kind of detailed. But there's much intermingling of these, and of course they're all in Theravadan Buddhism too. So if you read any of the Abhidharma teachings, traditionally there's said to be three baskets of Buddha's teachings. There's the sutras, his recorded words. There's the Vinaya, which are the rules of discipline for the different communities. And then there's the Abhidharma, which was the kind of high level discussion teachings of an analysis of what he taught in the sutras. And there's where you can see a lot of these things about the ayatanas, the objects. It gets, I'm not trained in that at all. And yet it makes very fascinating reading, because you see how seriously Buddha's successors were thinking and teaching on all of this. And this analysis of the human being, analysis of your own mind, you start to become familiar with the complexities and what's actually going on, which of course is tremendously helpful, because instead of just living in our karma, living in our afflictive emotions, and just wrestling all the time with our sense of self and other, instead there's this path that can be understood. And at the very least, it's always been for me, it's like the Dalai Lama being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. I think for ordinary people, they have no idea. They can't find Tibet on a map. They don't know who the Dalai Lama is. They don't know the Dalai as a Mongolian title. They don't know any of these things. They don't know anything about Buddhism, of course. But they still feel that, oh my goodness, somebody must have checked this guy out. There must be something positive there. That's very important. And so too for me in studying these higher teachings, so to speak. Similar kind of sense, you rub up against superior intellects, superior minds, and that's kind of reassuring. This isn't blind faith. So I recommend Kanze's book for that, because he approaches it very helpfully, as an educated Westerner and as his audience. Lama Tarchen was always one to say too that, it was so interesting to him that here you have the Dzogchen teachings, and although there's nothing really that can be said about it, that the texts on Dzogchen are more voluminous than any other classification of teachings. Because when you can't say something, you say a million words going around it trying to describe it. Think about you run into a great author trying to describe the taste of a banana or something. It's just amazing how many facets there are. But I think this is a good place to stop for tonight, because next time going forward, here's this wonderful picture of Vajradhara Buddha, and the next on page 159 is Mahamudra 1. So we're getting 2 and then 3. We're getting very close to the end as we go. So any questions, anything from anybody? Occurrences, whatever. Rachel, you raise your hand, you're just waving at me.
I'm resting my,
Yeah.
I'm actually just stretching my back. Sorry.
Yeah.
I have a question, but not for public
All right,
consumption.
you got it. No, she wasn't. She just put her hand up to hold her head.
Heavy weighs the crown.
That's right. That's right. But you make me think. You're just triggering random thoughts. One thing I first noticed about Rinpoche when he first came is how big his head is. He's got this big head. No, I don't know that one. Okay. All right. Well, this is good. It feels good to be in the thick of this, so to speak.
Burden and Mike.
Okay. All right. But if not, we're good. We'll next Thursday we're still doing, right? We have some movies coming up, but for right now, study group continues on Thursday night.
Actually, this Sunday, we're going to have a movie we're going to show for the benefit of all beings. So, and I think we have it figured out that we can actually play it over Zoom and in a manner that the whole Sangha here can watch on TV. So we're all together at the same time watching it. So if you don't know the movie, it's a really wonderful movie about Garchen Rinpoche's life. And if you have seen it, myself, I know I can say that as many times as I have seen it, each time I learn something new, or I hear something new, or it goes deeper. And so I really encourage everybody to come anyway, even if you've seen it before.
Mm-hmm.
During morning practice. So we'll probably just do opening prayers, Frank, and
Maybe just brief opening
because
prayers.
the 37 practices are read during the movie. Yeah. We'll just start it right after the opening prayers, because it's an hour and 40 minutes, I think. Right, Dave? Yep.
And the filmmaker is Christina Lundberg, who's now the the head administrator at the Garchen Buddhist Institute. She was living in Boulder at the time, and both our daughters helped in the production of the movie, including translating in Nepal or Tibet.
Well, they did a lot of translation afterwards, just on but Tracy accompanied Christina to Tibet to interview family and close friends of Rinpoche's, because she had spent time with them earlier.
And Megan going to Lapchi?
Yeah.
so
Megan went to Lapchi.
You don't see them in the movie, but they were helping like that. They get credits at the end.
And there's footage from the retreat land that our Sangha had at one of the first retreats that he came to in 1998. So it's kind of lovely.
Yeah, it's wonderful movie.
There are several scenes from that retreat.
Carved in stone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's Sunday, regular time.
Yeah, regular time Sunday, and we should be done by noon
All
or
right.
so. Anyway,
All right.
okay.
Thank you guys for working at the movie so we can watch it from here.
Well,
Yeah.
as a matter of fact, we're going to set it up tonight, and we've never done this before. So I'm going to, if you're willing, I'll just leave the meeting open, and it'll probably be 15, 20 minutes before we get it set up. But you can tell us if there's something wrong with it.
Oh, sure, we could test it out. Thank you.
Great.
All right, so we'll dedicate this evening then to all motherly sentient beings. May we understand the suffering of all beings. May we understand our own suffering. May we see into the nature of the mind, and from that, liberate ourselves, liberate all. May all beings attain Buddhahood. Svaha. Okay, thank you all. Yeah.
I was thinking about how changes. I don't know. I just was thinking, it's just like how I saw the movie about and it was such a scrappy, really smooth little kid, kind of like
Yeah. All right.
he had this food, and I think they totally cheesed.
Uh-huh. Right, a recluse kind of thing, and oddball.
I was thinking about what needs to be very exact. So I was watching the third Batman, and I mean, in that movie, he loses everything.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? He saves everyone.
Uh-huh.
When he says at the end, you don't know nobody, anything in the city, they took everything from you. It's like, you have to give them everything. It's like, yeah, but I'm not done giving them. You know, but I don't know. It just seems like that's the kind of mind you have to
Yeah.
do that. It's just not. It seems like it's so hard. We're supposed to do that. It seems like it's so hard.
It's our resistance that makes it hard, but remember it's internal. It's not the appearances; it's the attachment to the appearances.
Think about that mind. There's nobody who has more mind. Really made that spruce.
Right.
The biggest plane ever made.
Right.
It has to be like an extreme level of mind. You know what I mean?
Right.
Why did he make that big plane? Because he couldn't do what he did before the plane.
Yeah.
Because it's in there. If that happened,
Uh-huh. I know, out of spruce, out of plywood and stuff, right? He made it out of wood.
also wood.
Yeah, that's spruce, I think.
I just think about like even just for yourself. Just feel like a change in some way.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes we interpret losing something as bottoming out or defeat or something, but even like the AA people know, you bottom out, and that's the start of. Uh-huh.
I don't know. I guess maybe I'm not doing out of the book.
Uh-huh.
But I'm not. I'm not thinking becoming Larry Yu. See how I can definitely see how it's.
Yeah, yeah. If you can see it, though, that's the liberation of it. I mean, in other words, Howard Hughes didn't see what he was becoming. You know, he was moved by those fears or whatever triggered in him. And the next thing you know, like he was wearing Kleenex boxes and shuffling around Las Vegas.
It seems like you move away from those. It seems like those times were more fear for some reason. Yeah. I think because we get information instantly, I think we know more, so it makes people less afraid. Time period.
Might be the opposite, Keen. People have so much knowledge that it feeds their fear where they don't have to have it. I mean, they can go to very kind of extreme kind of places very easily because they can find other people thinking the same way. And there's no kind of,
I see information overload.
yeah, there's no moderating influence. There's lots of knowledge, but there's no wisdom. So it's this funny kind of thing where we think that, it's kind of like a computer engineer thinks the more data bits you have, the better it'll be. But because those are limited to begin with, and there are assumptions that go into that, you can actually make things worse without knowing it. People don't choose to make it bad. There you
I
go.
see because people add that wrong information more quickly.
Yeah, it's like, what's that saying they say to, I can't remember, what is it? To someone,
Yeah.
I can't remember with the tree, you might remember it. It's like to someone with
Yeah,
a
just log in
fly
to the
swatter,
meeting
everything looks like a fly.
that we got going
I mean,
right
the
now.
only empowerment you have is to, hit something.
Right, that's all you can do.
And yeah, and you're just wired that way, and you don't see the other possibilities that maybe the fly will fly away. Maybe a dragonfly will come and eat it. Yeah. Right.
Rescuers, that was
There you go.
they are really big. I didn't see this movie in the theater, but dude, they have these vehicles that fly like a dragonfly in there. Really? Like, so instead of like the helicopter blades,
Yeah.
it's dragonfly.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
That is the coolest thing.
Very cool. I love dragonflies.
Oh, you see that? Oh my God. Everything they do, they fly around in these dragonfly vehicles. Right? It's amazing. I was thinking about, geez, why do you ever get the technology to do that? You know what I mean? Because, the dragonfly flies so precise.
Yeah.
It's really kind of amazing.
They can hover.
I have the time to analyze these things when I'm sitting at the airport waiting for a ride for an hour.
Change direction.
Oh my God. Oh, sure.
Yeah, so you're the host.
Yeah, I'm talking with I'll answer.
Because I don't like not using things.
Yeah, right,
I know it said you can put them on your sign,
Yeah, yeah.
but I'm wondering, can I use them for other adornments to be worn, but not use them at all?
Yeah, yeah. Let me find out. I would think so, but I don't know.
So I'm gonna start making them because literally I've gone through three. It's just
Amazing.
this year.
I've always found that such a sort of vivid experience too, in all of these. You're not expecting it, the next thing, you're like me, floor, That's good stuff.
So right now, I'm using this map
Yeah.
because I don't have another one that I don't have my map. I don't know. Maybe to get another map, I don't know. I'm a bit of a quandary.
And the very first Tibetan Buddhist thing that we did was go to see the Dalai Lama in Buffalo. And we had a choice of doing things. And we decided to go see him tearing down the sand there. Everybody was standing around looking at the monolith. I don't know anything at this point. I didn't know one thing about being a Buddha. That's why someone came in At first it was diorama, we don't actually tear down the monument. But right before that happened, some kid's mouth broke. And it was all over the place. So everyone was trying to catch up all the beats. And someone was saying, "Oh my God, it's Street Rock," and then right at the whole dialogue thing, oh yeah, it was really, it was amazing. Anyone wants to move. Oh, they're gonna put it in the DVD one. DVD. But I think.
There's probably some way to select it.
Yeah, you gotta get the remote, or, there's buttons underneath.
Oh.
There's buttons under here to get there. 'Cause there's like a menu. That will be more.
Oh, well, yeah, okay. So it's receiving, see that barking, so it's recognizing the speech, you don't even know. Except it's not, can come out of the speaker. Are you sharing your? Oh, you're doing your screen share already? I would cancel the screen share for any other issues as well. Maybe this was the same issue we had the other day.
Do you want to stop the sharing on the iPhone camera, kind of screen sharing, or just definitely stop on?
She's sharing her screen. And that's interfering with maybe.
See what? You know.
Oh, okay, is the microphone actually turned on?
There you go.
All right.
You want me to turn these down?
No, I got this one now.
Is this because we've got two Zoom
Yes.
sessions, two computers going?
Right.
Yeah. Right. So
Want
you
me to
got the
move up
sound
here?
working.
I think this one. This one goes over here.
Hopefully, because you will need to actually turn the first microphone off once we get going. Yeah. Yeah, look at that.
All right, let me, but now it, oh yeah,
So what I would say is let's mute Gretchen on Zoom right now and then start
Yeah.
the video and then start the
Right.
screen share.
Right. So you want to mute?
You click on that and you can mute.
Can I turn the video off?
Hang on, Slack, I gotta do something here. You need to make me the host of this.
Make Dave?
Yeah.
Or to
No, the other direction.